The skyline of Chicago burned, reflecting in the cold, dark eyes of the most feared man in the city. He had built an untouchable criminal syndicate, but it took exactly 10 seconds to destroy it. And all because he asked a waitress in a cheap diner one simple question. The neon sign outside Arturo's diner flickered with a persistent buzz, casting a harsh red glow over the rain-slicked pavement of Chicago's South Side. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cheap black coffee, fried onions, and stale despair. Sophia Mancini stood behind the Formica counter, wiping down the surface with rhythmic, practiced motions. She was a woman who blended into the background by design, wrapped in a pale blue uniform that clung to her soft, full curves. For most of her life, her plus-sized figure had made her a target for unsolicited remarks or dismissive glances, but Sophia had forged an armor of quiet resilience. Behind her warm, dark eyes hid a mind that noticed everything and forgot nothing. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour when the city's ghosts, insomniacs, and predators came out to feed. Sophia poured coffee for a tired truck driver and smoothly sidestepped a wandering hand from a drunken regular without missing a beat, her face an unreadable mask of polite detachment. She had learned long ago that in a city run by monsters, the best way to survive was to be utterly uninteresting. But tonight, the atmosphere in the diner shifted dramatically. The bell above the door chimed, and a sudden, suffocating silence fell over the room. Tommaso Marchetti had arrived. As the head of the Marchetti crime family, Tommaso was a myth carved from flesh, wealth, and violence. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in the grease-stained diner. He was a striking man, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of shattered ice. 2 massive enforcers flanked him, their hands resting casually near the bulges under their jackets. The few patrons left in the diner immediately lowered their heads, suddenly fascinated by their cold eggs and lukewarm coffee. Tommaso did not look at the patrons. His gaze swept the room and locked instantly on Sophia. A heavy, dangerous energy radiated from him as he walked toward the counter. He took a seat on one of the cracked vinyl stools, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. Sophia did not flinch. She did not drop her eyes. Her pulse drummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her hands remained perfectly steady as she approached him, pulling a fresh coffee mug from beneath the counter. She knew exactly who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew who he was. The Marchetti syndicate controlled the docks, the unions, the illicit gambling rings, and half the politicians in the state. But Sophia also knew something else, something she had observed over the past 3 weeks of midnight shifts. He watched her pour the coffee, his icy eyes tracking the movement of her wrists, the curve of her hips as she shifted her weight, the soft flush of her cheeks. Tommaso had been coming to Arturo's diner every Tuesday for a month. He had always sat in the corner booth, holding quiet meetings with his lieutenants. But tonight, he came to the counter. He came to her. "You have a heavy presence, Sophia," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the empty space between them. Most women in this city starve themselves to look like glass sculptures, fragile and empty. You look like a woman who could survive a war. It was an intense, unsettling compliment. Sophia placed the coffee pot down. "I just serve the food, Mr. Marchetti. What can I get for you tonight?" Tommaso leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter. His proximity was intoxicating, smelling of expensive cologne, rain, and cold steel. "I don't want food. I want an answer." You have a reputation in this neighborhood, Sophia. They say you are a girl who sees everything but says nothing. A vault of a woman. Sophia gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles turned white, but her voice remained perfectly level. People talk to pass the time. It doesn't mean anything. It means something to me, Tommaso replied, his gaze dropping momentarily to the soft swell of her cleavage before meeting her eyes again, unashamed of his hunger. You watched my men tonight. You watched the men who sat in my booth an hour ago. He was referring to his inner circle, his most trusted advisors who had left the diner shortly before Tommaso returned. I asked you a question in my head 1,000 times since I first saw you, Tommaso murmured, the dangerous edge of his tone softening into something dangerously possessive. But tonight, I only have one question that matters. I want you to look around this room, look at me, and tell me the truth. You see the shadows of this city better than anyone. So tell me, Sophia, who is the greatest threat to my life right now? The diner was dead silent. The truck driver had slipped out the back door. The enforcers by the entrance stood like statues. Tommaso stared at her, expecting a frightened whisper, perhaps a pointed finger at a rival street gang, or perhaps a tearful plea for him to leave her alone. Sophia looked at this terrifying, magnificent man. She looked at his emir built on blood and loyalty. She took a slow, deep breath, her full chest rising and falling. Then she delivered the reply that would burn his world to ashes. You are Mr. Machete, because you are the only man in this city who doesn't know your entire empire was just sold to Marcus Blackwood. Tommaso froze. The air in the diner seemed to freeze with him. The name Marcus Blackwood was a poison pill. Blackwood was the ruthless, calculating leader of a rival British-American syndicate that had been trying to bleed into Chicago for years. What did you say? Tommaso's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Sophia did not back down. Her hidden strength, the quiet resilience that had kept her alive on these dark streets, flared to life. She leaned in closer to him, the man who sat beside you an hour ago. Your underboss. When you went out to take a phone call, he didn't drop his napkin by accident. He dropped it so the man in the trench coat passing by could swap it for a ledger. I saw the crest on the man's ring. It was the Blackwood crest. They aren't planning to go to war with you, Tommaso. They already bought your generals. You have no empire left. You just don't know it yet. For a torturous 10 seconds, Tommaso Marchetti simply stared at her. The wrath of a betrayed Mafia king was a terrifying thing to witness. The muscles in his jaw locked, and the icy blue of his eyes darkened into something utterly demonic. But he did not direct that fury at Sophia. Instead, a strange, dark obsession took root in his chest. In a world full of sycophants, liars, and frail socialites, this soft-bodied, beautiful waitress had just looked the devil in the eye and handed him the absolute truth, knowing it could get her killed. Without a word, Tommaso stood up. He reached across the counter. His large calloused hand wrapping firmly around Sophia's wrist. His grip was an iron vice, inescapable but surprisingly mindful, careful not to bruise her skin. "You're coming with me," he commanded. Sophia's heart leapt into her throat. "I have a shift to finish. I can't just leave." "You don't work here anymore," Tommaso said, pulling her gently but firmly around the counter. "If what you say is true, Arturo's diner is going to be a pile of smoking rubble by morning. Blackwood's men will realize you saw the exchange. They will come back to silence the chubby waitress who sees too much. And I am not going to let a single one of those bastards touch you. Studs. Touch." Before Sophia could protest further, she was ushered out into the freezing Chicago rain. Tommaso's enforcers seamlessly formed a protective wall around them, shielding Sofia from the elements and any unseen snipers as they moved to an armored black SUV idling at the curb. Tommaso shoved her inside and slid in next to her. The door slammed shut, plunging them into the dark, luxurious interior. "Drive," he snapped to the driver. "The Gold Coast safe house. Now." As the SUV tore through the wet streets, Tommaso pulled out an encrypted phone. He didn't speak, but his fingers moved with rapid, violent intent. Sofia huddled in the corner of the leather seat, wrapping her arms around her plump frame, suddenly acutely aware of how out of her depth she was. She had survived by being invisible, and now she was sitting shoulder to shoulder with Chicago's most dangerous man. Tommaso finished his text messages and threw the phone onto the seat. He turned to her, his massive frame shifting in the darkness. "You are trembling," he noted, his voice dropping its harsh edge. "I just ruined your life," Sofia whispered, looking down at her hands. "You saved my life," Tommaso corrected her, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his knuckles grazing the soft curve of her cheek. A shiver ran down Sofia's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. His touch was an electric shock, deeply intimate and terrifyingly possessive. "I've spent years building the Marchetti family," Tommaso said, his eyes scanning her face in the passing streetlights. "If my underboss has turned, then half my capos are compromised. Marcus Blackwood doesn't make a move unless he knows he has the board cornered. My empire is already gone." "What will you do?" she asked, unable to pull away from the hypnotic intensity of his gaze. "I am going to burn it to the ground," Tommaso stated plainly. "I will slaughter every traitor who ate at my table. I will tear my own syndicate apart, piece by piece, so Marcus Blackwood inherits nothing but ashes and corpses. But first, I needed to secure my most valuable asset." Sofia blinked in confusion. "Asset?" Tommaso's hand slid from her cheek to the nape of her neck, his thumb resting over her racing pulse. "You, Sofia, the woman brave enough to tell a monster he was bleeding. From this night forward, you belong to me. You will be protected by my blood and my bullets. No one looks at you, no one touches you, and no one breathes your name without my permission." They arrived at a soaring glass high-rise on the Gold Coast. Tommaso bypassed the lobby, taking her through a secure underground garage to a private elevator that shot them up to the penthouse. The doors opened to a sprawling, minimalist fortress of black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the storm-battered city. For the next 48 hours, the penthouse became a command center of absolute carnage. Sofia watched from the periphery as Tommaso orchestrated the systemic dismantling of his own life's work. Enforcers came and went, bringing duffel bags of cash, encrypted hard drives, and grim reports of the night's executions. Tommaso was merciless. He ordered hits on his closest friends, his mentors, and his financial advisors. Yet amid the chaos and the blood being spilled across Chicago, Tommaso's attention always gravitated back to Sofia. He was intensely, almost suffocatingly protective of her. He ordered a private chef to prepare extravagant meals for her. When she tried to hide her full figure in one of his oversized dress shirts, feeling self-conscious in the opulent surroundings, Tommaso cornered her in the master bedroom. He backed her against the glass window, the burning skyline of the city serving as their backdrop. "Stop hiding from me," he growled softly, his hands gripping her thick, lush hips. "I'm not built for a place like this." "Tommaso," she confessed, her voice trembling as she looked down at her curved stomach and heavy thighs. "I'm just a diner waitress. I don't fit in your world." Tommaso's eyes blazed with a fierce, possessive heat. My world is currently dying on the streets down there because it was built on lies. You are the only real thing I have left." He leaned down, pressing his lips against the soft crook of her neck, inhaling her scent like a starving man. He worshipped her body with a reverence she had never known, his large hands tracing every curve, every dip, and every stretch mark as if they were holy relics. He made her feel powerful, beautiful, and fundamentally essential to his survival. But the peace of their high-rise sanctuary was an illusion. Marcus Blackwood was not a man who accepted defeat, even a scorched earth defeat. By the dawn of the third day, the encrypted phone on the glass coffee table buzzed. Tommaso answered it on speaker. "Well played, Marchetti." A crisp, aristocratic British voice echoed through the room. "Marcus Blackwood. But you missed one rat, and unfortunately for you, that rat gave me the security codes to your private elevator." An explosive charge suddenly detonated in the hallway, blowing the penthouse's reinforced steel doors off their hinges. The blast wave tore through the penthouse with the force of a localized hurricane. The reinforced steel doors became deadly shrapnel, flying across the room and embedding themselves into the drywall. The floor-to-ceiling windows shattered instantly, unable to withstand the pressure change, turning the million-dollar view into a terrifying vortex of howling wind and raining glass. Before the sound of the explosion even registered in Sophia's ears, Tommaso was moving. He lunged across the space between them, his massive body tackling her to the thick Persian rug. He covered her completely, shielding her soft frame with his broad back, as debris rained down around them like jagged hail. The entire high-rise swayed slightly, a sickening groan of stressed steel echoing through the floorboards. "Stay down," Tommaso ordered, his voice a low, lethal rumble against her ear. He rolled off her smoothly, drawing a heavy, matte black Glock from a shoulder holster hidden beneath his ruined dress shirt. The dust had not yet settled when the first wave of Marcus Blackwood's mercenaries breached the hallway. They wore dark tactical gear and carried suppressed submachine guns, moving with the precision of highly paid professionals who expected a slaughter. They did not expect a demon. Tommaso fired 3 times in rapid succession. The staccato cracks were deafening in the enclosed space. The first 2 mercenaries dropped instantly, their momentum carrying them forward into a heap of lifeless limbs. The others scattered, diving behind the overturned marble dining table and the remnants of the kitchen island. Sophia lay flat against the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But she did not scream. She did not panic. In the chaotic, violent diner of her past, she had learned to observe, to compartmentalize fear, and to look for the exit. Through the thick smoke, she analyzed their surroundings. The main entrance was a choke point of death. The windows offered a drop of 40 stories. But she remembered the private chef from the day before, bringing up a cart of groceries from a secondary service elevator hidden behind the pantry. "Tommaso," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the ringing in his ears. "The pantry! There is a freight lift!" Tommaso shot her a look of pure, unadulterated admiration. He laid down a suppressing fire, shattering the marble barricade the mercenaries were using, forcing them to duck. "Move!" he shouted. Sophia scrambled to her feet, staying low. She was not a small, delicate woman who could effortlessly glide across the floor, but she possessed a powerful, grounded center of gravity. She moved with urgent purpose, her thick thighs driving her forward with a surprising, relentless speed. She reached the pantry doors just as a mercenary flanked Tommaso from the opposite side of the room. The man raised his weapon, aiming directly at Tommaso's exposed back. Sophia did not think. She reacted. Beside her on the counter sat a solid granite mortar and pestle, a heavy decorative kitchen tool that must have weighed 20 pounds. A fragile woman would have struggled to lift it. Sophia grabbed it with both hands, twisting her torso and using the full force of her core and weight to hurl the heavy stone across the short distance. The granite mass struck the mercenary squarely in the side of his tactical helmet with a sickening crack. The man's shot went wild, burying itself into the ceiling as he collapsed backward, unconscious before he hit the floor. Tommaso spun around, his gun raised, but the threat was already neutralized. He stared at the fallen man, then looked at Sophia, his chest heaving. His icy eyes burned with a dark, terrifying devotion. "You are a goddess of war," he breathed, grabbing her hand. They rushed into the pantry. Sophia slammed her hand against the heavy freight elevator button. The doors opened with an agonizing slowness. Behind them, more of Blackwood's men were pouring into the destroyed penthouse. Gunfire chewed through the pantry walls, sending clouds of flour and splintered wood into the air. Tommaso shoved Sophia into the steel cage of the elevator, but as he turned to return fire, a bullet grazed the side of his torso, tearing through flesh and fabric. He let out a sharp grunt, staggering backward into the elevator car. Sophia hit the basement button, and the heavy metal doors slid shut just as a hail of bullets sparked against the steel grate. The elevator plummeted downward, leaving the war zone behind them. Tommaso slumped against the metal wall, his hand pressing against his side. Dark, thick blood seeped through his fingers, staining his white shirt crimson. His breathing was labored, but his eyes never left Sophia. Sophia moved toward him immediately, her hands firm and steady. She tore the fabric of his shirt to inspect the wound. It was a deep graze, bleeding heavily, but the bullet had not lodged inside. "You are losing too much blood," she said, her voice dropping into a register of calm authority she usually reserved for breaking up fights between drunken dock workers. "I will live," Tommaso rasped, catching her wrist. He pulled her closer, pressing his forehead against her soft stomach, seeking her warmth. He was a man who had faced death 100 times, but in the dim, flickering light of the descending elevator, he looked only at her. "You saved my life again, Sophia." "We are not out of this yet," she replied, gently running her hand through his thick, dark hair. Her touch was meant to soothe, but it only seemed to inflame the possessive fit inside him. The elevator hit the underground garage with a heavy jolt. Sophia wrapped Tommaso's arm over her shoulders. He was a massive man, easily over 200 pounds of dense muscle, but Sophia's sturdy frame bore his weight without buckling. She anchored her feet, wrapping her arm around his waist, and hauled him forward. They moved as a single unit through the dark garage, finding a low-profile armored sedan tucked away in a shadowed corner. Sophia shoved Tommaso into the passenger seat, took the keys from his bloody hand, and slid behind the wheel. She threw the car into drive, smashing through the garage security gate, and merged into the rainy, unforgiving streets of Chicago. They drove to a secondary safe house in Pilsen, a derelict, unassuming warehouse that Tommaso kept strictly off the books. Inside, the space was cold, industrial, and stripped of the luxury of the Gold Coast. It was a place meant for survival, equipped with a medical station, weapon caches, and secure communication lines. Sophia guided Tommaso to a steel examination table and went to work. She gathered medical supplies, antiseptics, and bandages. As she cleaned the wound, Tommaso watched her intensely. He did not flinch from the sting of the alcohol. He was entirely captivated by the concentration on her face, the way her full lips pressed together, the flush of exertion on her cheeks. "Most women would be hysterical," he murmured, his gaze dropping to the soft curve of her breasts, visible beneath the collar of her borrowed shirt. They would be demanding to go home, screaming about the blood. "I told you, Mr. Marchetti," Sophia said, securing the bandage around his waist with tight, efficient movements. "I am not like most women. I know what this city is. I know what men like you do." He reached out with his uninjured arm, wrapping his large hand around her thick hip, pulling her flush against the side of the table. "No, you are nothing like them. You are real. You have flesh and strength and a mind that terrifies my enemies. You carry my weight as if you were born to do it." His hand slid up her back, tangling in her hair, pulling her face down to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a clash of teeth and bruised lips, tasting of copper, adrenaline, and desperate, consuming hunger. Tommaso kissed her like a man drowning, drawing life from her breath. Sophia surrendered to the pull, her hands gripping his broad shoulders, matching his ferocity. In the cold, echoing warehouse, surrounded by the ruins of his empire, they found an anchor in each other. By dawn, the blood loss had stopped, and Tommaso's raw, terrifying energy had returned. He stood by the steel table, loading magazines into a series of assault rifles. His face was a mask of cold, calculated murder. Marcus Blackwood thought he had won. He thought he had severed the head of the Marchetti family and claimed the city. But Blackwood had made one fatal miscalculation. He had left Tommaso alive, and he had underestimated the waitress. Sophia sat on a crate nearby, a mug of black coffee warming her hands. She watched Tommaso prepare for a war. He seemed destined to fight alone. "All your generals are dead or compromised," she pointed out softly. "You cannot take on a fortified syndicate by yourself, Tommaso. You don't even know where Blackwood is operating from." Tommaso paused, his hands resting on the cold steel of a rifle. He looked at her, the harsh lines of his face softening only for her. "I don't need an army. I just need a location. Blackwood will be celebrating. He will be at his central command, solidifying his new assets. If I can find that command, I can cut the head off his snake before he realizes I am still breathing." Sophia stared down at the dark surface of her coffee. Her mind, a steel trap of observations and numbers, began to turn gears. She thought back to the diner. She thought back to the underboss dropping the napkin, the man in the trench coat, the ledger. "The man in the trench coat," Sophia began, her voice steady and deliberate in the quiet warehouse. When he bent down to retrieve the ledger under the guise of picking up a dropped napkin, his coat parted. "I saw the crest on his ring, yes. But I also saw the inside of the ledger when the pages fluttered." Tommaso crossed the room instantly, standing over her. "What did you see, Sophia?" "I used to take orders for 20 tables at a time without writing them down," she explained, looking up into his icy eyes. "I remember numbers. There was a red stamp on the inside cover of the ledger. It said, Pier 39, Warehouse 4, Container 8804. A dark, terrifying smile spread across Tommaso's face. "The private shipping docks on Lake Michigan. It's a Blackwood stronghold. He imports his illegal European munitions through there. That is where he will be coordinating the takeover." Tommaso did not go alone. While his upper management was compromised, the ghosts of his syndicate, the hitmen, the loyal foot soldiers who lived in the shadows and operated strictly on Tommaso's personal orders, were still waiting in the dark. Tommaso made 3 phone calls. Within an hour, a dozen heavily armed men arrived at the Pilsen warehouse. They did not ask questions. They only looked at Tommaso, and then, with silent respect, they looked at the plus-sized woman standing by his side, recognizing her as the new protected asset of the family. When the assault on Pier 39 began, it was not a battle. It was an execution. A torrential downpour had masked the approach of Tommaso's men. They breached the warehouse with synchronized explosives, flooding the space with smoke, flashbangs, and relentless, pinpoint gunfire. Marcus Blackwood's guards, arrogant and relaxed in their perceived victory, were cut down before they could even unholster their weapons. Tommaso moved through the chaos like an avenging grim reaper. He did not rush. He walked with a heavy, measured tread, a suppressed rifle in his hands, eliminating targets with surgical precision. He was fighting for his city, his pride. But most of all, he was clearing a path for the woman waiting for him back in the shadows. He found Marcus Blackwood in the glass-enclosed office, suspended above the warehouse floor. The aristocratic British boss was frantically trying to access a floor safe, his bespoke suit ruined by the dust of the breach. Tommaso shot the glass door off its hinges and stepped inside. Blackwood froze, turning slowly. He looked at the bleeding, battered, but utterly terrifying form of Tommaso Marchetti. A bitter, desperate laugh escaped Blackwood's lips. "You refuse to die, Marchetti. It's almost admirable." "It's necessary," Tommaso corrected, raising his weapon. "You lost your empire," Blackwood spat, trying to maintain his arrogant facade, even as he stared down the barrel of a gun. "Your capos sold you out for a fraction of what I offered them. And for what? Because you got distracted? My men told me about the diner. You threw away Chicago because you developed an obsession with a fat, common waitress." Tommaso's eyes went dead. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "She is not common," Tommaso said, his voice a chilling, hollow whisper that resonated with absolute finality. "She saw the cracks in my world that I was too blind to see. She stood by me when the men I broke bread with betrayed me. She carries more strength, more loyalty, and more beauty in a single breath than you have in your entire miserable bloodline." Tommaso took a step forward, the gun aimed directly at Blackwood's chest. "You thought you bought my kingdom, Marcus, but you forgot the most important rule of the game. A king is nothing without his queen." Tommaso pulled the trigger. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky, peaceful and entirely under new management. The Marchetti family had been purged, rebuilt from the ashes into an impenetrable fortress of loyalty. There were no more traitors. There were no more leaks. The new underground base of operations was a sprawling, ultra-secure estate on the outskirts of the city. Inside the grand study, Tommaso sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing the financial reports of their newly acquired ports. But his attention was not on the papers. His eyes were fixed on the doorway. Sophia walked into the room. She was no longer wearing the pale blue, grease-stained uniform of Arturo's diner. She wore a deep crimson silk dress that hugged her lush curves, tailored specifically to celebrate her full figure. Diamonds rested against her collarbones, but the most dangerous thing about her was the quiet, commanding authority she carried. She was the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld. 2 massive enforcers flanked the door. As Sophia passed them, they bowed their heads in deep, unwavering respect. She walked over to Tommaso, resting her hands on his broad shoulders. He immediately abandoned the paperwork, pulling her down into his lap. He buried his face in the soft crook of her neck, inhaling her scent, grounding himself in the reality of her presence. "How is the Empire tonight, my love?" she asked softly, running her fingers through his hair. Tommaso looked up at her, his icy eyes burning with that familiar, dark obsession. He traced the curve of her hip, entirely captivated by the woman who had ruined his old life, only to build him a better one. "The Empire is perfect," Tommaso whispered, pressing a kiss to her jaw. because it belongs to you. Did the explosive conclusion of Tommaso and Sophia's dark romance leave you breathless? If you loved this gritty tale of mafia betrayal, hidden strength, and a ruthless boss who will burn the world down for the woman he obsesses over,